Good afternoon and welcome to Dialogues for Future and Darwins Circle extra round, so to say. Yesterday was the Darwins Circle main event. You can watch it on the ORF TV Thek in German or on their website in English. And today their standard will dig deeper with some speakers of the Darwins Circle and some additional experts. How technology can save the world was the motto of this year's Darwins Circle and of course also the motto of today's event. And we have two very interesting panels today. At 6 p.m. we will discuss how technology can help us understand our minds better. But we will start with the panel titled, Is Data Enthusiasm Here to Stay? New Trends Shaping Collaboration. Because the current situation is not only taking data to a whole new level, but also highlights complete new ways of collaboration working together. And I'm very happy to welcome some wonderful guests today. We have Marko Berkovic, Regional Director at GitHub.
Good evening. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Beth Blauer, co-founder and executive director for the Centers for Civic Impact at Johns Hopkins University.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We have Matthias Reiter-Pasmandi, Deputy Head of Department for Social Sciences and Humanities at the Austrian Federal Ministry of Education, Science and Research.
Thank you. Looking forward.
And Barbara Wittmann, Country Manager, Germany, Austria, Switzerland at LinkedIn.
Excited to be here.
Welcome and thanks for being our guests today. Let's start right in. In the last year, we really saw an influx of data into our daily lives. 2020 was, besides so many other things, probably also the year of the dashboards, not only for developers and decisions and scientists, but for all of us. And in last summer, when we went on holiday, if we went on holiday, we probably checked the infection numbers of your destination first. It's a whole new perspective on data in the everyday life, and it became sexy somehow. Beth, you're working a lot with institutions and how to use data to make better decisions. Do you think the current situation has changed the interest in data, and do you think that trend will sustain?
Yeah, I mean, I've waited my entire career for us to get to this moment where data really was at the center of decision making. And, I've worked for almost 2 decades now with public policymakers as they try to infuse more data into the way that we legislate, the way that we think about decision making, the way that we budget our governments. But this year is a year like no other, where both legislators and governors and presidents were using the same data that I was using and my parents were using as we were all trying to navigate kind of those very personal decisions that we make on a regular basis. Where are we going to wear a mask? Where are we going to go to the grocery store, have food delivered? Were we going to let our children go to school? These were, very innately personal decisions that we were all having to make, and we were all using sort of the same playbook to make those decisions. But there is a lot of very rich data in the world that should be navigating many decisions that we make on a regular basis, whether we live near where we work, whether we spend time in our cars, whether we recycle our trash, whether we, engage in behaviors that are going to add value back into our environment, whether we're working to make our communities safe or inclusive. These are all decisions that can be guided by data and data that is available. And I think this moment where we're in right now with COVID and the way that we've been tracking the disease and letting it influence has really started to change a habit that we're used to using when we're shopping or ordering things online. And now we're going to start seeing, I think, a lot more of this data really driving kind of personal and familial decisions, which is very different, and government and the private sector are going to have to really respond to this demand for people to have more real-time information about what's happening in our world as they start to make very personal decisions.
Mm-hmm. But not only personal decisions, also scientists rely heavily on data, of course, and not only life sciences and medicine, which we saw a lot in the recently, but also social science and cultural studies. Matthias, you're working on, and you know a lot about this infrastructure for scientific work, like scientific databases. What's your view on this? Have these projects gained importance recently?
Yeah, thank you. Most definitely. One of the big aims of our ministry is to give researchers better access to data, better access to data collections and to data archives, data repositories. This is one important aspect of open science in general that has many aspects, also open access, open source. Marco talked yesterday about it, but our focus is really on giving better access to research data and also giving better access to data, for instance, from the public sector. And I think we have seen in the last year, data collections have gained a lot of importance, especially in the social sciences. There is a database of social science research data projects and research data collections in Austria. There are more than 200 projects in this database by the Institute of Advanced Studies here in Vienna, the IHS. And we have seen a lot of online collections, and it's very important for research to make these data sets as open as possible, but also under the paradigm to have them as closed as necessary. As in the social sciences, of course, we deal with data about people, about individuals, and it's very important to always have the right levels of access, the right licenses when we talk about who can actually access what kind of data and which parts of it. And I hope maybe that I can later go into one or two more aspects of this.
Mm-hmm. And also a very important aspect of data is our work environment. That's why we have LinkedIn on board. Barbara, most of the people are working quite differently now than they probably did a year ago. In the home office, probably some kind of hybrid. But now on the one hand, workers worry about their work-life balance, and employers worry about also of that, of course, but also about controlling maybe their work. Is there some kind of surveillance data that is emerging? And do you think that this data can maybe also save problems somehow? For example, to get better work-life balance in the home office?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We definitely see on an aggregate level that behaviors are changing and the work environment is changing for many people. But it's really important to state, and Matthias said it, that data is used in line with privacy guidelines and used with a positive intent and aggregated and anonymized. And that is true for data that's being used at large scales with a macro view, but it's also true for companies, that company use data to understand what's going on, how do people feel, and just kind of, oh yeah, I rely on some conversations with the people I talk all the time, but that you have a regular view, for example, on mental health, on stress levels, that you regularly ask your employees certain questions. That's then where data is really, really powerful. But also when you look into your industry or maybe in your region where you see trends are changing, take Vienna as a metropolitan area or other large European cities. Employees are interested in having hybrid setups for the future that allows them to have a longer commute way. But is that really what everybody wants? Do people want to work 2 days from home, 5 days from home? Are there differences between certain job roles where people have different interests? And you don't know if you don't ask people. And I think that's the important thing, to continuously ask and don't make assumptions, because things change. And that's what we have seen at LinkedIn, that in the first phase a year ago, it was like not so stressful, but now the second lockdown is really hard for families. And so it's important to understand if trends are emerging and that you can react as a company. It's also important to understand where are there potentially gaps on the leadership side, where you get feedback from your team. Certain managers really understand how to engage employees and have an open communication culture, and some other departments struggle more. So you can learn and you can understand what is going on. So those are the element, I think, where companies need to change what kind of data they use, how they get it, and in what kind of frequency. And then it's beneficial for the company and for the employees. And if you have employees that are happy, your results are so much better.
And everybody is talking now about collaboration because of this situation. And speaking of collaboration, I think Marco can tell us something because he works at GitHub, and Marco, your complete business model is built upon collaboration. First of all, how does this actually work? Because can you explain it for non-developers maybe? And how do you think that this collaboration aspect has changed in the past year?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the first way of collaboration, I mean, collaboration can happen in many different ways. And, concretely here in our current pandemic situation, we're talking about asynchronous potentially. So asynchronous collaboration and remote collaboration. So not people not sitting in the same office and not necessarily having a face-to-face meeting all the time in order to get things done. So remote work and asynchronous work was kind of discovered by the open source community more than 25 years ago, and the whole global open source projects have been started with people globally contributing. So just to explain what open source means and how this global collaboration works, GitHub is this central platform similar to LinkedIn for businesses and for professionals, or as let's say Facebook or Twitter are platforms for social networking. GitHub is a platform for open source code and for software developers. So this is where kind of the central repository of globally available code is put. And you're finding that in projects that are being built together internationally, you have people contributing from over 41 countries on average on a single project, on a single open source project on GitHub. So this is where GitHub, and this is where open source really comes from, and it is this remote asynchronous collaboration. And this is really in the DNA of the open source community, and allowing this, actually, you're getting the possibility and the chance to have people that in fact don't speak the same language, the same human language, to collaborate and to work together effectively and efficiently in building a project together in the open source community, because they're using computer code. So almost open source is like the new global language, so to say. And obviously, as a company, we live and breathe this kind of remote and asynchronous work. So GitHub today is over 70% remote, and there are a couple of interesting and fun facts. When I joined GitHub more than 6 years ago, the first thing that I was told was, hey, here's an email address, but don't use it internally. All internal communication is kind of open to everybody else within the company, and they can collaborate and contribute to this and provide their feedback to that. So this is the open collaboration, and the inner sourcing and open sourcing is in the very DNA of it. And I think that also this capability for people to collaborate and to work together in different time zones and in different locations, and all of this brings immense power for us, especially in this pandemic. So this is actually what gave us the possibility to continue innovation, to continue drive. And this was a very interesting statistic that we've been observing, and Philip, we can talk if needed about it later, of, for instance, on these impacts that we've seen on the global collaboration when it came to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Beth, your work is also a lot about collaboration, because there's collaboration between governments and scientists and universities like yours, the Johns Hopkins University. Do you think that this kind of cooperation or collaboration will intensify in the future because governments need someone to process and analyze all this data to make better decisions?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really good examples that have occurred in the last year. We made it a very sort of purposeful effort at Johns Hopkins University to pair our sharing of data and information with subject matter expertise. So we have public health expertise that really is thinking from an epidemiological perspective, from a medical perspective, what does it mean to have COVID in our community? But then we're bringing in a data perspective to kind of lay out the landscape of how that work is going. And it is a little bit of a differentiator. And this sort of democratization of science has actually proved itself to be incredibly powerful. I mean, I don't know how many other, elementary school students a year or 2 years ago could talk about what flattening the curve meant, but now it's kind of in the regular vernacular. Everyone is trying to flatten a curve. And, it was an immediate sort of scientific notion that, has statistical relevance, has medical relevance, has public health relevance. And it was very, it was presented to the public in a way that was very digestible. And these kinds of collaborations between the data, between the science, but really rooting it in making sure that it would resonate with the public, that people cared about it, was able to be incredibly effective at changing people's behaviors, at getting people to understand why lockdowns were necessary, why we had to do things in order to protect ourselves from the virus. And I think that these are, we have siloed science and the way that we think about policy and the way that we engage with the public for too long. And it's had a detrimental effect. It's allowed toxicity, politicization, all of these things that we've seen sort of play out over the last year. And I think that now that we have seen the value and the power of being able to have science-based, fact-based decisions, fact-based conversations, and really have them in the lead, and really creating some kind of standard around it, is very powerful and something that we should think about as we move beyond COVID.
Mm-hmm. Matthias, what's your view on this? Because you are working on how to provide the infrastructure, like the databases for scientists. But do you think that this collaboration does also work the other way around? So that the state or also the public will get something in return for these projects?
Yeah, thank you. I also want to explain a little bit more about the infrastructures. But first of all, regarding the collaboration aspect, sharing data is really essential to work to collaboration among researchers. And it has so many advantages. The first advantage is the more researchers look at a certain problem, the more views you get. There is the opportunity for replicating, for trying again certain problems and certain solutions. And in some disciplines, this is really becoming a big issue, replicating results. For researchers, it's increasing visibility, it's increasing even citations, the money of researchers. And for the public, it's beneficial as well because taxpayers' money is used in a much more efficient way. So there's all sorts of positive aspects about sharing data. And the infrastructures we are providing and we are building, they are on different levels. So there is a European layer, there is a national layer. And on the European layer, there is this big vision, this big common project, the European Open Science Cloud. And it reminds me actually in many ways on GitHub. It's a network of fair data. And it's also about what Beth said, it's about breaking silos between disciplines, because it's a network of fair data sets from all sorts of disciplines, from the social sciences, from the life sciences, from climate research, from the natural sciences. And it's bringing together data sets from all different repositories. And for instance, in Austria, you have the Austrian Social Science Data Archive. They have built a data hub about a lot of data sets on the actual COVID crisis. And you can access all these data through this European Open Science Cloud. So this is really the research infrastructure layer for researchers. But of course, all these projects are working towards having also a societal impact, a social impact on society. And that is one of the virtues of open science in a more general way, that it's not only opening up within science, but also to the outside world. And including, for instance, normal people that contribute to research projects as citizen science, helping in data collection. So especially in climate research, you have a lot of data collection that is done actually by people with their smartphones, making photos of a certain landscape, how this has changed over time. And when you uploaded it in certain databases, you get an overview about the whole country, whole continent, and making climate change visible, and you can analyze it. So I think open science and open data is providing not only benefits to research, but also to wider society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but not only in research, but also in actually everywhere, the collaboration has changed. Usually it was collaboration meant sitting in a meeting room like I'm right now, and it's orphaned like for a year almost. Barbara, this new kind of collaboration also needs new kind of communication. And yeah, 1 year ago it was like chatting in the coffee kitchen, but it's not possible right now. Do you think that communication in the workplace has changed forever, or will we be forever sitting in front of video conferences?
I think it's quite obvious that a lot of people long for getting back to physical interaction, attending a conference, and I think there will probably be a spike. I'm like, oh, I want to see all those people, friends, colleagues, partners in the business context. But then probably you will also see the benefits of maybe shorter commutes, that you can divide your work when you have more quiet tasks, where it's great if you sit at home, and you can also maybe juggle some of your family activities better. But clearly, I think people are aware of limitations of virtual communication, whether it's video conferences and not everybody being able to speak up, maybe the level of engagement not being there. So I think we will all be a lot more sensitive what works and what doesn't work. So clearly we see that, but we also saw when we all had to almost go overnight in a situation to work from home, communication on LinkedIn increased, sessions increased, activity increased, and not only by the members. We saw also a lot of companies communicating more, and the communication was not only intended for future candidates, it was also intended for the employees, for customers. And it was so important to still see what companies were doing. And I think the awareness of your employer brand in a virtual environment, or your personal brand as a candidate, that will for sure change forever. But we had before the COVID crisis already video interviews. It's probably a much bigger population feels comfortable. And I think it's great that we are able to speak on stage, but we also are able, like this group, speaking now in a virtual environment. And we have all learned a lot of new skills communicating in a virtual environment, apart from being good on stage. So I think that is my prediction, and that's also what we hear from other companies, and what's being published on LinkedIn, that a lot of companies probably will move to a hybrid scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all these new scenarios and tools, I think for Marco, it's not new, because GitHub is working worldwide, almost remotely. Maybe you can tell, what can we learn from your work at GitHub? How do you handle collaboration in a collaboration company?
Yeah, or in a remote and asynchronous collaboration company. So I also have to tell you, I do miss meeting my colleagues dearly. So, I'm definitely, it's not like we've been remote companies, so nothing changes for us. I believe the human factor will stay, and and is going to return, hopefully as soon as possible, so that we can all socialize. We're still humans after all. But nevertheless, what we did observe, and I think this is as GitHub has 56 million users on this global platform, we're able to see various trends. And we're definitely seeing that not only GitHub, but in fact many companies, many businesses, and the open source world are embracing this remote and how should I say, non-time asynchronous collaboration styles. So in fact, we've seen over 40% more projects created since the lockdowns have been initiated. So people are spending definitely more time online and more time coding and working. As on GitHub, not only open source, but in fact also businesses are working on closed source software. We've seen an extension of the software developers' time spent coding. So there was an increase on the average time spent at work or virtually at work. This may be because you are saving the commute partially. This may be because maybe you have more time, and you're spending less time at the coffee machine. It's based on assumptions, right? But not only that people spend more time, we've seen an increase in productivity, which is an interesting point, right? So is it because you spend more time, or are you actually more productive in this almost forced remote collaboration situation? So there was a productivity spike of over initially 50% and then later up to 25% to previous time, right? So you have people handling things faster. So there's a shorter response time on reviews, for instance. So those are all very interesting trends. And I think that the pandemic has kind of almost involuntarily pushed many companies into considering this remote work and collaboration aspect. And many were shying away from it. But, now that they need to face this, you need to actually prioritize and figure out, what challenge do I have? Do I have a cultural challenge? What is okay for me? How far do I want to do this? And what are the benefits? Maybe I'm actually more productive. Now the ice is broken and you see my company is still productive and I'm still around. My employees haven't left me. So, we're doing actually something that really works. And it might actually even open further spheres for them. I mean, think about it. Historically, a company is forced to look for talent and to hire in the town that they have their office in. So you have a limited talent pool. But, with remote work and, asynchronous collaboration, you could actually extend your talent pool to a significantly wider population, and in fact find people who are maybe outside of your town or in your country or in Europe or even worldwide, and benefit from their knowledge that they could bring to you. So this is all opening massive new opportunities now that the ice is broken, I would call it this way.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, for the last round, I would like to come back to the initial question for a moment, and how data has influenced our daily lives. If you, the audience, searched for data on the global pandemic, that chances are very high that you landed at the dashboard at the Johns Hopkins University, where COVID data is from around the world is aggregated. And the special thing, it's all open data. But it's quite clear that data about health, if you're infected with a virus, is quite sensitive. How open should the data be that we are working with?
Yeah, I think we obviously have to, and I think, many of the panelists today have alluded to this, we have to be incredibly protective of personally identifying information. And so we've taken great lengths at Johns Hopkins University to ensure that you can't get into such a granular level in the data itself that it would allow for identification. It came, we had to really confront this as we were thinking through how we would display this data when we had very rural counties in the United States, where if you had a person that had COVID, it would be easy to identify that person just based on the fact that we have populations of, sub 100, 200 in certain very rural areas. And so there are some globby parts of our map, especially when you get down to those granular levels, where we've had to essentially extend protection so that the data cannot be reverse engineered to do any identification, because that's certainly something that we care deeply about. But we made sure that these safeguards were in place by investing in the right kind of governance. And governance has been incredibly important throughout the arc of this entire body of work to help guide how these protections, how we commit to these protections, how we bring new data into our resources, and how we think about our data sources and sort of qualifying data sources that we'll bring in, because we want to make sure we're aligning with data providers that also have the same level of intensity around these protections and making sure that we're not doing any identifying work. But again, this is, I think, an area where we've seen pretty big mistakes, particularly on government, where they've released data and you've been able to go back, and we've seen hobbyists or even developers go in and reverse engineer and be able to identify people. There was a very famous case of this with New York City taxi data, where we were able to actually identify individual people, and you could track where they were moving around the city. And so as we emerge into this new era where we are demanding more and more public data, I think it's incredibly important for us to consistently invest in governance and make sure that those protections are in place so that the individual is protected, and they have some agency over how they see themselves in the information itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, concerning privacy and this kind of data, I think we can get an interesting insight from Matthias, because you were working on coordinating a project called Registerforschung. I couldn't find an English word for that, but register is basically having all the data
research
that the
and
government
registry data.
Yeah, that is obliged to have, and it's very personal data. It's like where people live or income data, and it's very sensitive and private. Now, you want to enable scientists to use that data, and it's even in the government program. How does this work, and how is the privacy guaranteed in fields like this?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said also in the beginning. Access to data for researchers is very important, but the big paradigm is as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So if we have on the one side of the scale really open data, this can be data that is not personal data, and there are a lot of good examples out there. Then in the field of research, there's data sets that have personal aspects, and you might be able to re-engineer things, as Beth have said. So we in the science world, usually scientific use files are used. So you have a special licensing model that only researchers can use this data for research purposes. And then on the other side of the scale, you have data sets that should be purposely very closed. They are highly sensitive data sets that the state is collecting, but research with this data can be very valuable for society. So when we look across around the world, we see very good examples in Europe, very good examples in the United States, where this kind of data is analyzed. And especially now in the COVID-19 crisis, we see that analyzing these data sets can give us great insights into the development of COVID-19, in how social structures affect the spread of the disease, how certain medicines work, side effects, all these side of things. So these great resources, these great sources should be used for science. And that's why we are working on a reform that is making access to these data sets possible for researchers in a highly secure environment that is guaranteeing privacy and security to these data sets. And the project you mentioned in the government working program of the Austrian government is called Austrian Micro Data Center, AMDC. And this is following models from Scandinavia. For instance, Statistics Denmark is using a great model. And you have secure servers, secure environments, virtual machines that provide these security and privacy aspects that you cannot re-engineer, that you cannot even look at individual data sets, because individual data sets are of no interest to researchers. They look for averages, they look for patterns. So no one is interested in that personal data, but in the course of a project, of course, you need to work with them. So this is also a contribution to giving policy more evidence, and evidence basis for policy is one of the things we all want. And especially in the COVID-19 crisis now, I think we have seen that better access to data for researchers is one of the important things.
Barbara, what about open data at work? Do you think that the openness can lead to better workplaces? For example, if it became normal to rate your employer not only when you quit, but on a regular basis, or if employers, for example, publish their income reports?
Clearly, data has many, many benefits, but also what Beth and Matthias said, you know, the way how you use data. And one aspect I think that's super important, LinkedIn as a platform has a lot of data. And for us, it's super important that members govern their own data. And we always say members are our number one priority, and they decide what kind of data they want to reveal. And also companies own their company presence on LinkedIn, and it's their decision what they publish. And that's how you then govern the data that's visible. And I think it's super important that both companies, but also members understand how to govern data and what to reveal in what kind of situation. And one example is, if you're looking for a job, we first had a feature so you could secretly signal to recruiters that you were open for work, because it was exactly, oh my God, if I update my LinkedIn profile, my employer realizes I might look for another job. But then through COVID, we implemented a feature where you can openly signal on your profile open for work, and companies have to downsize. And there's even partnerships between companies how to use employees. And I saw something today that German airline Lufthansa works with a large Berlin hospital where they can simply help each other on certain roles on a temporary basis. And that kind of information is then super positive. And I think it's the transparency and not this rating, secret, anonymous feedback, often kind of criticism, that we really look for ways how to use data so everybody benefits, whether it's society, and LinkedIn does this as a platform where we supply data to governments. We work a lot with the World Economic Forum, where you can see labor trends, because this is where we have a lot of data and we are a kind of barometer for the labor market. So companies should approach data that they benefit, and if employees are happy, companies are successful. I know it's my mantra, but I think that's the important piece to understand. How can you benefit from the data and use it in a positive way?
Okay, thank you. Speaking of openness, I think one place where openness is exercised for a long time, actually since the very beginning, is the software industry. Marco, how has this openness in the industry changed it? And is there a difference between open data, what we talked about right now, and open source? Because a lot of people were concerned that the Corona apps that they should use are public on GitHub. Is this not concerning?
Well, absolutely, and that's a very good question. In fact, when you're talking about data and you're talking about code, you're talking about two very separate things. On the one thing, you're talking the data is something private, personal, and to be protected, while the open source code or the software code is in fact a machine that either gathers the data, processes the data, or analyzes the data. So it's almost if you're the passenger in a car, you're the data, and the car is the machine that gets you from A to B. So the vehicle. So almost there is in fact this dilemma of trust when it comes to data. With whom do I trust with my data, and how can I inspect that my data is being used correctly? And therefore, open source remains a very strong tool for this very inspection of how my data is being used. So, for instance, on the concrete example of the Corona tracking app, the Corona tracking app being open sourced and built on GitHub, so being visible, every single line of code, every function is fully visible, verifiable, and in fact changeable by anybody who wants to improve it. You are able to ensure and to actually see the complete data flow. So this should be able to gain trust. And in fact, if you find a flaw in how this application that gathers data and shares data that is included, you're actually able to eliminate it, and you're able to improve it and to make it actually safer for the data. And not only that, there is the voluntary data sharing, and then there's the involuntary data sharing. So when you have certain security incidents, leaks, so you may have built up everything, but in fact your software machine is imperfect and it does have some kind of a bug or back door that allows this data or the good that you need to protect to leak. So this is another aspect where GitHub is really investing heavily. So in order to find security risks and bugs that could be in the open source software or also in the closed source software. In fact, the funny thing, more than 80% of the security incidents, they are not put in on purpose, but they are honest mistakes that have been built in and that are being found. So this is all the things, for instance, that the open source community and we as a platform are trying to address and to solve with hopefully the goal that open source should give us in the mid and in the long term the capability to make the tools safer that are gathering, processing, and evaluating the data that we need to protect.
But
so
can we
open source is a piece of the whole data production evaluation chain that we're having, and in the data protection chain. This is basically the tool that enables it.
Okay. That was a very insightful discussion. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for watching it in the live stream. I hope those who are watching in the live stream are back in 20 minutes when we discuss about how technology can help us understand our minds. We'll be right back. Thank you very much, all of you. evening and welcome back to our second panel discussion. We will now discuss a completely different, but not the less interesting topic. How technology can help us with mental well-being, keep us healthy, and what can it contribute to understanding ourselves and our minds better, but also what ethical implications arise. And I warmly welcome some interesting guests. Nora Blum, she's the co-founder and CEO of Self-P, a German startup offering low-threshold online psychotherapy service against depression. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Jolan Victor, Chief International Officer at Headspace, an app designed to help people by offering meditation, sleep, and mental well-being exercises in general, and with millions of users worldwide. Hi, Jolan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We have Norbert Weidinger, CTO of the City of Vienna, and he is the deputy head of the Process Management and ICT Strategy Group at the City of Vienna. Hello.
Hello.
We have Newton Howard. He's professor of computational neuroscience and neurosurgery at the University of Oxford. He is working on hacking the brain code in order not only to cure brain diseases, but also to help everyone to live a better life without human malfunctions.
Hello.
Hi. And last but not least, Carolina Aguilar is working on something quite similar. She's CEO at Imbrine Neuroelectronics, a Barcelona-based startup that is using graphene-based brain implants to treat patients with brain disorders.
Nice meeting you.
Hi. Thank you all for participating in this discussion. As you can see, we have a very wide range of personalities here today. And although you all work towards a quite similar goal, make our life better and easier, you do it with very different approaches. And while brain implants still seem far away in the future, the rising popularity of self-care apps like Self-P or Headspace is clearly visible. And we're facing a quite complicated situation right now because while many people are suffering from mental consequences of the curfew, it's more difficult to physically meet people who could help. And although meetings with therapists are the most common exceptions to these curfews, many people are still now more reluctant to the professional help they might need. I start with you, Nora. Do you see a boost in popularity regarding apps like yours?
Yes, unfortunately, in a way we do. As you know, we provide online therapy programs for people with mental disorders such as depression and stress. And we have seen the numbers rising since the first lockdown. Our volume of how many people called us almost tripled, which is always so difficult because on one hand, obviously, it's in a way it's good for the business, but on the other hand, I'm myself a psychologist. I don't like seeing that people in Germany definitely they're not well at the moment, and I think it is something that is so important right now that we speak about the mental health of people and what the pandemic has done these days.
Mm-hmm. So, what's your view on this, Jolan? Do you agree? Do you observe a similar development at Headspace?
Absolutely. The business, unfortunately has been doing really well, but because of an unfortunate trigger, our B2B business is where we have organizations that reach out to us and ask for our product to be for their employees. We've had a 500% increase in that since the beginning of COVID. And what's interesting is that while COVID will hopefully, kind of have a different phase at sometime soon, the impact of that is going to be very long lasting. We predict for the next 4 years, the financial, the emotional, and the mental implications of what's taken place in 2020 will be pervasive, for not only people that have jobs, but individual consumers.
Mm-hmm. But the pandemic most certainly leads to more people having psychological problems. But do you think that this development also contributes to people talking more openly about it and thus destigmatizing the topic? Does the corona pandemic do that, do you think?
100%. It's created a place where in the past you could say I have a doctor's appointment and it would be totally acceptable at work to talk about that. Now you can tell your boss, I need to take a mental health day. Like I was really stressed, the blurring lines between work and home. And, this is my home office, this is work, this is home. It's not one or the other, it's both. And, if you have children that come in and you're trying to make a point, like all of those things are stressful. on top of the more grave impacts of COVID. So yeah, absolutely. It's become democratized. It's become destigmatized. And as managers can ask about how people are doing, they can check in on burnout, they can be proactive to provide psychological safety. All of those things we hope are enduring.
Mm-hmm. Nora, do you agree?
I definitely agree. I do see that. Well, I do see that it gets less stigmatized, the whole topic, but it is still stigmatized. So it's not exactly where we want it to be, but we do see progress. Like, we do also see a lot of companies approaching us and wanting to offer online programs to prevent mental illness for their employees. And I do think this is very important, and it's very important in a way that I think COVID can actually accelerate these steps towards employers and corporates actually caring more about the mental health of people. And I do definitely hope that it'll have this positive effect in some way, that we can look back and say at least it had this positive effect of corporates and companies caring more about mental health. And I do see that is happening right now.
Okay. Let's take a look into the future. We talked about apps and how they can make us feel better. Newton, you are working on something quite futuristic, on computer-brain interfaces. It's little implants in our brain that are already being used for diseases like Parkinson's. But could those implants also in the future cure psychological diseases?
Sure. The short answer is yes, but there's a bit of a couple of comments on the situation with the COVID and how that would probably augment and accelerate the need for such technology. The damage of the COVID-19 epidemic is both psychiatric and brain damage in a physiological way. Psychiatric is based on the sustained stress and all the environmental things, which if it stays for a longer duration, and a year is quite a bit of a long time, could cause permanent damage to executive functions and other areas. The other damage is that the actual virus lodges in the olfactory nerve areas and whatnot, and then is able to probably penetrate the brain. So you see evidence of short-term memory impact, smell impact, and so forth. And in autopsies of about 378 patients, there were axonal damages that were expressed in various areas, which also leads to seeing that there will be a need for surgical intervention or interventions that are of a serious nature. Now, back to the future, or the future is the present, is the technology which we refer to as the Kiwi Chip. And the Kiwi Chip is an elongated size of a rice grain that gets implanted in STN, which is subthalamic nucleus, part of the basal ganglia. As a result of that implantation, it actually records and stimulates simultaneously. So it reads and writes to that region through three modalities: light, electric, and through the chemical neurotransmitters, viscosities, and whatnot. As a result, it brings about a therapeutic effect for the movement disorder and the cognitive functions lost from neurodegenerative disorders. Mm-hmm. It was thought to be actually that this is a long shot in the future, only we started working on it about 12 years ago. So it is actually here and now, just going through the obstacle, the challenge of adaptation, ethical questions and issues, and technologies like what Caroline works on is also an enabler for that. As she's working on graphene, we work on the sister components, TNT, carbon nanotubes, but they're complementary because we have actually used graphene electrodes, and we have great success with it. So.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that like the apps we talked at the beginning are just an intermediate step to a fully digitized brain, so that one day a combination of these apps and computer brain interfaces mean we could select meditation or sleep or happiness and our phone screens, but we wouldn't have to carry out these instructions ourselves because they are sent directly into our brains?
So the apps are actually classified into various categories of these of their application. There are passive and active applications. There are ones that mediate the connection to a therapist, which was stigmatized in the past. It would be difficult to get to a psychiatrist due to cultural biases, to many reasons. So it makes that accessibility to the therapist easier. It also makes accessibility to the nature of the various therapies also simpler. And then the third classification is the technology that enable the early diagnosis through biomarkers and machine learning classification. In a suite of all of these together, it helps advance the patient goal, which is to actually be treated. However, I am concerned about that in this area that it operates in silos. So you have people who are working on meditation, and people are working on music therapy, people are working on art therapy, people are working on whatnot, but there's no full integration of the suite of tools to get it to be effective. And I encourage the researchers to actually work together on this sort of things.
Okay. Yeah, let me get Carolina on this issue, because you're working in quite similar direction. What do you think? Do you think that maybe as an intermediate step, that your technology can maybe also be used in more traditional treatment, like, for example, self-help or Headspace, to get some extra insights into how we function, at least until our personal brain computers are ready?
Yes. I'm going to complement all what is being said with a positive picture. I think one of the system changes that COVID and what we are going through is producing is actually patients want to take care of themselves. They want to take charge of their own diseases. So everything we do with systems that produce data is going to actually help patients to deal better with their diseases. And this is what we are trying to do. I mean, first, understand how the brain works in order to intersect with it. So understanding connectivity in the brain, it's mandatory in order to do something with the brain. So all these new elements, these materials, these systems are definitely going to go several orders of magnitude further, just because these materials are like the microscopes that we start seeing in the 12th century, just to discover bacteria and find the antibiotic. So we now have these capabilities to see biomarkers in the brain that before probably were not being seen, and they use therapies in a much more optimized way and using data to give back to the patient, so that patient has an interaction with their disease. Because, at the end, doctors are 1% in the life of a patient, especially in a chronic disease. You go 1 to 4 times per year to the doctor. They tell you how you are. Most of those times it is basic interventions, and then 99%, the rest, the patient is alone. So we need to help patients. And data is one way today to help them, and understanding their brain and producing therapies that help them interact with that disease is going to be a major step.
Yeah, still it's a very invasive technology, and even when we're talking about self-care apps like Headspace or Self-Help that already exist, a lot of people are hesitant or even refuse tools like these because of stigmatization, but also because of technology. Norbert, you probably know this cautious reaction to technology as the CTO of the city of Vienna. How do you handle situations like this? People just don't refuse new things.
Yes, this is an interesting question. Thank you for it. I can try a quite simple answer, because we have, let's say, a severe political saying and a clear direction which means that the city of Vienna intends to leave nobody back. So this means we want to offer a wide area of digital services, a wide area of also web services, apps, whatever you want, but there always must be an alternative way to get the services from the city, from the public offices, etc. So this is the principle on which all our work is based. Of course, on top there are a lot of initiatives to help people to get more trained, to help people to get more familiar with digital tools. This is a wide range from school initiatives till initiatives for the elderly people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's all
But
based on empowering, helping, and never ever forcing.
Mm-hmm. But isn't the discussion about technology in the public sector completely different from the one in the private sector? Because I somehow have the feeling that people are frivolously giving away their data to companies, but it's completely different when it's the public sector asking for data or for the use of a new technology. So it's almost impossible to have an app like Self-RP that's run by the state. So how do you think that this discussion is different between the private and the public sector?
Yes, indeed. I think there's really a big difference, but I think we have to have in mind that a few developments which will change the game. On one hand, we have the younger generations which are not so hesitant in using IT tools, whatever kind, and are not so not hesitating in using also IT tools which are provided by the public sector. This is one part. The second part is that, of course, we are really convinced that our programs, our offerings to give more information, to ensure people what we are really doing with their data, that this will help. Let me give one example. In reality, as we all know, we are in a quite nasty pandemic situation, and the city of Vienna is, of course, is investing really a lot of money in dealing with this and helping people to come over this time. And one part is, of course, a really huge testing activity. And the testing activity includes, of course, dealing with the results. Mm-hmm. And in reality, we offer results in a digital way, and this is widely accepted, really widely accepted. On the other hand, we have a clear offering for those persons, let's say 80 plus or so, which are not capable to use a smartphones or such a tool, and they can get the result in paper. But we see really wide acceptance in getting the results on your smartphone.
But if we go back to talking about health and like this this hesitance and so on, that there's also this discussion about health and especially mental health and health technology. There's the dilemma between generalization and personalization. And Nora and maybe also Jordan, how can ops apps offer such generalized solutions to psychological problems. Isn't it precisely here that individual solutions are necessary? Maybe Nora first.
Yes, actually, it's a good question, and we have this question every day with regards to how much of our contents needs proper tailoring, and how much is actually the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy that work the same for everyone, and that are important, that you have this base on knowledge that you give to the user. We're currently working with a mixed model. So we have some contents that are really the same for everyone, because cognitive behavioral therapy does work similarish with patients, and it is okay to give some standardized material, I think, and it's the same with the manuals of cognitive behavioral therapy. They're not they're quite similar with treating patients with depression, but then you also need obviously always unique content that is tailored to the specific needs and specific goals and requirements of the individual patient. And I think this is very important. I don't think that, especially with people with mental disorders, there can be a one-size-fits-all solution. It just doesn't work, because each depression is very different and each mental problem is different. And this is what we've seen very early onwards. I think in the first year when we started the company, we had very strict divisions between helping people with anxiety, and then helping people with depression, and then helping people with burnout. And then after a couple of months of getting user feedback, obviously we noticed, this is years ago, oh, we can't have that, because there's so much comorbidity between the different disorders, and there's so much similarity between the different disorders, and then again there's so much distinction between the individual patients. And I think there is no one-size-fits-all solution really when trying to tackle mental disorders. It really needs to be some individualized approach to the specific patient needs.
Jalon, is there a one-size-fits-all for the things you offer in Headspace?
I totally agree with Nora. So Headspace is an app that's got over 1,000 hours of content, but what I love about it is that there's even different types of meditations. So for example, the outcome of meditating right is that you feel a heightened sense of mindfulness, and therefore when you next experience a stressful situation, you're better equipped. So the app itself has these tools and techniques, and I think of them as exercises for your mind. If you think about going to the gym, there are exercises we all hate. There are exercises where we feel better about doing. And so that's exactly what Headspace is. There might be a body scan where you start at the top of your head and you decompress all the way down to your toes. That might not work for you. You might be more of a walking meditator. You might be somebody who needs to visualize something. You might need just more sleep. You might need a sleep cast or a sound cast. So the intent of the app is, one, a huge variety so that whatever your favorite exercise is for your mind, you can find it. But the other piece, and you touched on this in your earlier question, Philip, is around the fact that it's private and nobody's watching you. So if you're having stress, if you're having mental health challenges, you don't even have to schedule an appointment. You just open up the app and you meditate for a minute or 3 minutes or 10 minutes, and hopefully you'll have a sense of mental relief. So the fact that it's a huge library and nobody's looking creates a safe place for our consumers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yeah, this whole discussion about personalization and generalization comes to a whole new level when we talk about advanced technologies like artificial intelligence. It's ubiquitous in the technology sector. And as we know, AI is mostly insights gained from data, lots of data. Newton, can these generalized conclusions even be applied to the individual? Because a lot of research in your field, for example, by Elon Musk or something, is going to this, let's connect the brain with AI. So do you think that these generalized conclusions can be applied to the individual?
Absolutely not. Let's take a disorder like autism, and the heterogeneity of autism alone, the unique flavor of depression, the sequential indications of having anxiety as a result of depression or depression as a result of anxiety, whether the depression is an affective, meaning it's a component of a bipolarity or schizophrenia, or is it a cognitive damage or cognitive decline, so forth. So I'm just trying to draw the level of complexity in it. Now, taking that to AI, there are people that want to reverse engineer the brain. There are people that wants to make a machine like the brain. I think the ultimate supreme authority is what nature has already solved. So the nature solved the multiplicity and duplicity and different type of data heterogeneity already in this machine that we have on our body, the brain. It operates on 40 watts or less. It does low frequency compute. It integrates sensory input from various things. It does all of that with elegance and efficiency. So AI is lagging behind. AI is still looking at classical statistical probabilistic models and machine learning pipeline and neural nets that actually mimics smallest element, but not even come anywhere near 10,000 dendrites that sits on one neuron. And quite a few people are not paying attention to learning what nature have already solved. Meaning that, individuals like Elon Musk seems to think that there will be one day where the machine would take over. I think that one day the human will restore what they lost in capabilities and restore the human dignity to anyone who has lost faculty due to mental illness or brain disorder or damage and whatnot. And you have got yourself something much better than a machine, much more capable than a machine, probably not dealing with a structural arithmetic, but is capable of doing recursive mathematics. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave it at that.
Carolina, you want to add?
Yes, I'm going to come back to my comparison. It took since the 16th century, where the first microscope was invented, until the 20th century, where penicillin was discovered. So we had some tools, but we could not find that antibiotic. There's going to happen, or it's happening the same with new materials and also with AI. It's going to take a time. However, this means that having new tools like these are going to help us going faster, right? I mean, that is undoubtedly. And we already can see what machine learning can do when we are trying to understand brain biomarkers. I mean, usual current interfaces, and I've worked 13 years on them, little sensors, very little number of sensors. And therefore, the biomarkers that you can identify are very minimal. Now, the brain is very complex, and you have to put many variables together, many biomarkers together, as beta gams, gamma bands, all these needs to make sense and needs to be correlated with symptoms. Computing can do that, but machine learning can do it in a much faster way. So I think machine learning is going to help us to go faster. Hopefully, if humans learn to collaborate, we are going to go even faster. And there's also very much promising pipeline of what I mean beyond artificial intelligence, like quantum computing. I mean, this is very far away, but definitely there are good tools that are coming to help us going faster.
Mm-hmm. Norbert, it's we already discussed that destigmatization regarding like therapy, but also technology is quite good, and we need to be more open as a society regarding that topic. How do we achieve that? How do we convince people? Because I think that's also quite part of your job a little bit, that technology won't eat them, and it's how do we teach them the right thing?
This is a really good question, but in reality, I don't think that there is a one-fits-all recipe to reach this goal. And I think we have to go a lot of different approaches. In my opinion, the most important thing for the public sector is to convince all people that we are a trustworthy institution, and trust is the basis of acceptance of digital services of cities, counties, states, whatever. This is the basic. The second, of course, is information, clear, focused for the target groups, etc. And third, of course, we must offer the right digital services for the right target group.
Okay, thank you. We are almost at the end of our time, but let's make one quick final round because we have been spoken a lot about the future, and let's name a thing, like a device or a condition regarding our topic today that you would be very happy to see in 10 years. I have Nora at the very top of my screen. So what do you think is, what would you like to have? Is it like a better version of self-help, or is it what device, what thinking we have this regarding this topic in 10 years?
Whew, that is a tough question to the end. I do wish that it would become very normal for everyone to use mental health apps, that everyone would be feeling fine and not stigmatized to use these apps, maybe Talks, Headspace, or maybe Self-Help, to care for their mental being and improve it. And that is completely normal, so that really everyone is carrying one of these devices to care about their mental hygiene. I think it's not so much about the device, but more about the openness of people to actually use it and to feel okay with it.
Okay. Thank you. Chulan?
Yes, I'm going to do a yes and Nora. I think the accepting this, the awareness to talk about it, but then also to be able to predict what you're going to feel in different situations, because we're not going to eliminate stress. We're not going to eliminate anxiety, but we can help people be better prepared. And I think that there's different environments and situations that do create and induce higher levels of stress. How do you better anticipate and ideally avoid those, or know when you're putting yourself in those situations so you can say, hey, I'm going to go to a situation that's going to increase my stress 50%. How do I better prepare for that? How do I equip myself with the tools so that when I leave that situation, I'm not doing negative behaviors then as an outcome of those stimulus?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chulan. Norbert, what do you wish for in 10 years? What do you want to have?
If I did understand you right, you did really ask for advice in the future.
It doesn't have to be a device. You can also say how you want.
No, I would just like to answer very basically, just having in mind a really bright variety of problems we face in dealing with people in the city of Vienna. And I had a really basic wish. I really did want to have a device, a workstation, without crashes, without forced updates, with fully compatible, which will enable us as a community, which will enable us as a city to give them services without having to fear that one part of our citizens will not be able to use them because of such problems.
Mm-hmm.
Very basic.
Yeah, well, interesting. Thanks, Norbert. Newton.
My wish is to see that brain health is treated just with as much respect as we do when we go to the dentist very frequently to remove plaques. The brain has the same repository of things, moving techniques to craniofacial as opposed to craniotomy and surgical process, having a Kiwi chip that would detect in advance and correct, having material like Caroline, widely accepted and adopted by the organizations like the FDA and whatnot. And these are all one classic spectrum of tools that will change, restore our human dignity.
Okay, thanks, Newton. Last words, Carolina. What do you want to have?
Yeah, my idea is that Euro really connects, and that Norbert was talking about is a foundation to share, and that there is a digital roadway where we all connect and all these synergies happen across the countries without having to battle country by country, reimbursement system by reimbursement system, regulatory body by regulatory body. At the end, what we are going to do, or what we are all doing, is extraordinary. If it will connect, genetics with brain function connectivity, with meditation, this is what we fully enable people, right? When these synergies happen, this is that it's very difficult to make them happen the way we are acting. And I know there's very good will in making this happen. And the European Union was one project to go in that direction, but I think we need more effort. So in 10 years, we'd like to see all these synergies flourishing for the sake of all the population.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. And thank you all very much. That was a very insightful discussion with a broad variety of opinions and views, perspectives. And thanks again also to the participants of the first panel and to the Darwins Circle for this cooperation, and of course to our viewers. Thank you very much for listening and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you all.
Bye.